Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a review of the new Urban Decay Naked Wild West palette. I did receive this in PR, but as always, I plan to be completely and totally honest with you on how I feel about this formula, and there are definitely things about this palette that I like, but also a lot of things that I don't like. So we will get into that, as well as some comparisons with other palettes in my collection and 3 different looks that I created using this palette. So let's check out the packaging first before we dive into the inside. And I just love the packaging on this one. It has this really beautiful iridescent snakeskin pattern that is just gorgeous. I really think they did a great job with this. It does come in a hard plastic case just like the other Naked palettes, and on the back it's just plain. You don't have any shade names or anything like that. It says that the bulk of this palette is made in the United States of US or imported ingredients. The brush that's inside is made in China and it was assembled in the Dominican Republic. So let's go ahead and open it up. And inside we have 12 shades in both matte and shimmer finishes. We have actually 4 shimmer shades and 8 mattes. So this palette is very heavy on the mattes versus the shimmers. And it does have a nice mix of both warmer tones and cooler tones. You have these cooler toned grays right here. You also have this cool blue and this deep gray. And then of course this beautiful cool turquoise shade. And then you also have some warmer shades as well, like this copper, the orange, the warm brown, and then this beautiful gold, also these lighter shades down here. So it's a really nice mix, and I do think there's a ton of versatility in this palette, which is one of the things I like about it the best. I can easily get just a gray cool tone look, or I can get something very blue, or I could go for more of a copper or gold look. There's really a lot of possibilities. One of the looks that I did later on in the video actually combines some of the warm shades with the cool shades, so you can mix them as well. So I do really love that about it. When it comes to the formula, the matte shades, I find when they swatch, they're very, very smooth. In a swatch, they go on beautifully. However, I do think that the deeper matte shades, when applied to the eyes, they initially look pigmented, but if you want to blend them out, they do fade significantly as you blend them, and you do have to go back in and build them up again and again to get the color that you see here in the palette. On the flip side, these lighter shades down here, I was actually surprised by the pigmentation in them. This one, Nudie, and also Laredo, they look like very light shades, but on my skin tone, when I picked it up with a brush and put it in my crease, it actually showed up a little bit deeper than I was expecting it to, and I felt like these blended out really, really well, while the deeper mattes tended to get very patchy, which again, you will see in the demo later on in the video. But when it comes to the 4 shimmer shades, I was a bit disappointed in 2 of them, these 2 right here. I found that Bud and Rustler, when you swatch those out, they're really silky, they're very pigmented, and they blend effortlessly. They're just so silky smooth and very buttery feeling. So I did really enjoy those 2. However, Hold'em and Cowboy Rick are kind of more of a loosely packed formula where you really need something to hold them together. So I'll show you what they look like when you just swatch them out with a finger, and they just are very glittery and very loose, like I said, and there's just a fallout that goes absolutely everywhere, whether you're either swatching them with a finger or if you try to pick them up with a brush. They're just incredibly sheer. So what I learned with these is if you just go ahead and spray them with a little bit of setting spray on your finger or on a brush, they apply much easier, but even with that, I think your finger is still the best bet, because I did try wetting my brush and it just wasn't the same. So I highly recommend wetting these 2 shades for the best color payoff. So anyway, that's a little bit about the formula. Now let's go ahead and dive into some comparisons, and you can see whether you already have something like this in your collection or not. Okay, so the first comparison that I wanted to make was with the Born to Run palette. One, because it's the same brand, so the formula is going to be kind of similar, and also because the shades look like they are really, really close when you look at these 2 side by side. And when you see them swatched out, that definitely seems to be the case. Born to Run does have additional shades. It's a bigger palette, and I found that the formula in the Wild West palette actually seemed to be a little bit smoother than Born to Run, and I'm not quite sure if that's because my Born to Run palette is super old and maybe the shades are kind of dried out a little bit, because I remember really loving the formula of that one. So anyway, I do think these 2 are really, really close. Next up, I have a highly requested comparison, and that is Wild West versus the ColourPop Dream Street palette. Looking at the two together, it definitely seems like they have some really similar shades, and swatched out, I mean, yeah, they really do look like sisters. Not exactly twins, but sisters for sure. Some of the shades are spot on dupes for each other, while other ones are a little bit different, but I think the same vibe is definitely there. I had also thought about the Rimmel Jewel Rocks palette as being a potential dupe for Wild West, and I've always really loved the shades in the Jewel Rocks palette. It's my favorite one of all of the Rimmel palettes, and I think it has this really pretty southwestern vibe. And as it turns out, these two are not as quite as alike as I thought that they would be. I didn't really find any dupe shades between them at all. So while they do have that similar vibe, I wouldn't really say that the Jewel Rocks is a dupe for Wild West at all. Next we have the e.l.f. Retro Paradise palette. This one was kind of a wild card. I wasn't really sure what was going to happen when I swatched them out, but just looking at the palettes side by side, it seemed like some of the shades might line up, but I was pleasantly surprised by how close this one was. Not every shade is exact, but some are close enough that I think they would look super similar blended out on the eyes. It also has that same mix of warm tones like copper, gold, and brown and orange, and then you also have the cooler tone shades, particularly the blues and also that grayish taupe. So I was really wowed by this one. Next, I also thought about the NYX Ultimate Utopia palette. This one has a ton of colors to choose from, and many of them seem to be very similar to Wild West, just looking at them side by side. Again, it has a lot of the same warm and cool tones, so when I swatched and others that come really, really close, the only thing was I didn't think the formula of the NYX was particularly good. I found the shadows to be very powdery and not that pigmented, with a lot of the shimmers being kind of hard to pick up. The last comparison I have is with Huda's Mercury Retrograde palette. At this point, I was just looking for other palettes in my collection that had a pop of turquoise in them, but when I looked closer, I realized that the Huda palette also had some of those warmer tones in it as well. So when I swatched these two out, I realized that there weren't really any real dupe shades, but the vibe is definitely still similar. The turquoise shade in the Huda palette is a matte, and in Wild West it's a shimmer, so that's a big difference. Also, same thing happened with the deeper blue, but in reverse. The one in the Huda palette is a glitter, and in Wild West it's a matte. But still, if you have the Huda palette already, you might feel like you don't necessarily need the Wild West, especially if you think you could get very similar looks out of it. Alright guys, so now let's go ahead and get into the 3 looks that I did with the Wild West palette. So the first one is going to be more of a cool toned look. So I started out with the shade Laredo, and this is that cool grayish taupe shade, and I'm applying this using my Sigma E25 blending brush and just putting this right up into my crease and starting more toward the outer corner just so that most of the color is concentrated over that way. And I am using tape as well just as a guide. I find this really helpful, especially because I have hooded eyes that are more downturned, so I like to make sure that I can get that lift at the outer corner, and the tape really helps me to find that angle that I need. And when it came to blending out this Laredo shade, I thought that it blended pretty well. I did struggle a little bit with trying to really diffuse the edges because it's very pigmented and it really has nice grip to my skin. It's not something that's very powdery that's blending away. So I did struggle a bit with trying to blend this shade out. Next, to deepen up the outer corner, I'm using the shade Pony Up, and this is that really deep charcoal gray matte. And applying this one to the outer corner, I thought that initially it went on really, really pigmented. It looked just like it did in the pan, but the trouble came once I started blending this one out a little bit with a fluffier brush. I thought that it really started to diffuse the color and made it look so, so light, and also it was getting a little bit patchy, so I did have to go back in and keep adding more and just building up this color. So I found myself dipping back into the palette a few times just to add that depth that I wanted, because just applying it once, basically when I blended it out, it didn't look a lot different than the Laredo shade, so I did have to work with this one a little bit. And then for my lid, I'm using the shade Cowboy Rick, and initially I picked this one up on my brush, and I thought that it was really, really sheer and hard to pick up with the brush. I had to keep dipping back in again just to get some color payoff with this one. I finally gave up and just used my finger, and even that was causing tons and tons of fallout on my cheeks, so I ended up spraying my finger with a little setting spray, and that seemed to do the trick and just kind of hold the shade together a little bit better. So then once I removed the tape, I just went ahead and blended those harsh lines. This took a little while as well, again, just because of how pigmented these shadows are. They didn't want to budge, so I took a really stiff, firm brush, and that seemed to do the trick a little bit better. And then I just took a small pencil brush and added a little bit of that Pony Up shade, which was the dark charcoal, to the outer lower lash line, just to connect the two together. And here's the final look. I think all in all, it came out good, even despite all of the struggles that I had with trying to blend and trying to get that lid shade to show up. But I do really like the final result. I think it's a super pretty, cool tone look. All right, so then for look number 2, I wanted to do something a little bit more on the blue side. So I'm picking up the shade Tex, which is that deep matte blue, and I'm putting this one straight on the outer corner of my eye. And again, applying this initially, it looked really, really pigmented. However, when I took a fluffier brush and started to blend it out, it faded considerably. So it got a little bit patchy, and again, it was a little difficult to blend. So I had to keep going back in and adding some more. So I just started feeling like this look was getting really messy. And as you guys know, I'm not a makeup artist and I don't feel super comfortable in my eyeshadow skills. So a lot of the time when I'm doing these looks for you guys, I really just am doing it to show you how the shadows perform on the eyes. But I'm not always comfortable with some of the colors that I'm using. And, you know, I really just wanted to show the blues in this palette, but I'm finding this one in particular very difficult to work with. So to try and soften things up a little bit, I went into the shade Nudie, and I'm applying this one just to soften up the crease. I didn't intend to use this color, but that blue, I think it was just because it was such a deep shade and it was really hard to blend out, that I just thought that this Nudie shade might soften those harsh edges a little and make it look just a little bit less messy. So when I removed the tape, I thought it looked okay, but then the trouble started again when I tried to blend out the harsh tape line, and I just feel like it got messy all over again. So then for my lid, I'm actually using 2 shades mixed together. I decided to mix Hold'em, that gold shade, with Bud, which is the turquoise blue shimmer, and mixing them together resulted in this really, really pretty, almost greenish shimmer shade, and I love the way it came out. I was thinking I didn't necessarily want to use the gold or the blue, but I like the combination of the two so much. I thought it was really beautiful. And because the shade Bud has a better texture than the gold shade, which is like that Cowboy Rick one, it's very loosely packed, I didn't have a hard time packing this one onto my lid with my finger. I didn't feel like I really needed to wet it. So anyway, here's the finished look. I do really love the lid shade. I just wish that the outer corner wasn't quite so messy. It just kind of came out a little bit patchy trying to blend that edge. I don't know, maybe using the tape wasn't a good idea with a shade that dark. I'm not really sure, but unfortunately there isn't a lighter blue shade in this palette that I could have started with to blend it out. So I don't know, I like the look in theory, but I think I would need to probably practice using these shades a little bit more. All right, and then for look number 3, I wanted to do a mix of both warm and cool tones, so I'm starting out with the shade Nudie in my crease, and I was very pleasantly surprised by how pigmented this one came out. It looks super light in the pan, but on my skin tone, it really shows up nicely, so I was blown away by that, and I thought that it blended beautifully as well. And guys, I am sorry about the bright exposure on this. I'm not sure what my camera was doing. It was a different day. Maybe the lighting was a little bit different because I'm sitting in front of a window. So I apologize for that. Hopefully you can see the colors. So next I'm picking up the shade Ghost Town, which is a warm orange shade, and I'm applying this one to the outer corner. And this one as well, I felt like I had to keep building it up. Every time I blended it, it just faded so much that I had to go back in and pick up more and more. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's a bad thing, especially if you like more blendable shades or if you'd rather start out light and build things up. As we saw in the last look, sometimes when you start with a really dark shade, then it's harder to blend it out. So sometimes it's easier to just use something lighter and then build up the color. But because this one started looking a little patchy, I decided to go into the shade Rustler, which is that really beautiful copper shimmer. And I'm just applying this one on top of the one that I already put there. I just felt like this one blended so much nicer, and it just made everything look a little bit smoother and less patchy. And then next I'm picking up the shade Cowboy Rick. Again, I used my finger and some setting spray, and I'm just putting this one from the inner corner to about the midpoint and just kind of blending this one into the copper shade a little bit. I thought it would be pretty to do kind of a cool tone mixed with the warm. And then just on my bottom lash line, I'm putting the shade Bud, which is that shimmery turquoise blue. So here's the finished look. I wasn't entirely sure I was going to like the warm tones mixed with the cool, but I think it came out with a really pretty effect. Alright guys, so my final thoughts on the Urban Decay Naked Wild West palette are that I like it, I don't love it. I think a lot of the shades I struggle to work with, particularly these darker matte shades, also these two shimmers. I think that they just really need a little something extra to get them to stick to your lids, whether that's setting spray or glitter glue or whatever you prefer to use. I also think, based on a lot of the comparisons that I showed, that this isn't necessarily a really unique color story. I do have a lot of other palettes that look very similar to this. So to be honest with you guys, I'm a little bit torn about this one. I do like the versatility that it has, but again, I have that in the other palettes as well. So anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on this one down below. If you've purchased it, or if you are thinking about it, or if you're planning to skip it. I always love hearing your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for spending time with me today. I really appreciate it so much. If you're new to my channel and you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, especially if you like eyeshadow palette reviews. I do a lot of them here on my channel. So thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all in my next video. Take care, guys. Bye.